Well, another historic building in downtown Regina is coming down. On Sunday, the 100-year-old building caught fire. It took days to be extinguished completely. The brick building near Cornwall Street was once home to the popular Novia Cafe. Well, the cafe shut its doors in 2011, and the building's been sitting empty ever since. Some are mourning the loss of this historic building right in the heart of downtown Regina. Others see it as an opportunity to build something new that won't sit vacant on prime real estate. Well, today on Blue Sky, we're talking about the value of historic buildings in our province. We know there are often problems with old buildings. They rarely are wheelchair accessible. They often require expensive maintenance, and they have old and inefficient heating and cooling systems. But they're also often beautiful with incredible craftsmanship, and they contain the history of our province. So we want to hear from you today, folks. Have you ever been involved in trying to restore or repurpose a historic building? What was that process like, and why did you want to do it? Do you have a historic building in your community that has been repurposed? Our guests today are Jackie Schmidt and Lenore Swiston. Jackie is president of Heritage Regina. She's in the Regina studio. Hi, Jackie.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
And Lenore is with Prairie Wild Consulting in Saskatoon. She's on the Municipal Advisory Heritage Committee and chair of the Saskatoon Heritage Society. And she joins me in our Saskatoon studio. Hello, Lenore. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Jackie, we'll start with you. What was your reaction to hearing news about the fire?
Well, I think that we were all without words, but I think we need to wait and find out exactly what happens and find out from the fire department what is happening with this building. But right now, we need to change the conversation around the value of heritage properties, particularly among developers. When you say that they're hard to take care of, these buildings also have a maintenance policy and a maintenance program that is tied into them. One of the things that I see, like on the social media accounts for Heritage Regina, is a lot of people complaining that these buildings sat vacant. Well, a lot of these heritage buildings were built or were purchased as speculation, and they were closed and they were not available for lease. So they're not decaying because they were heritage buildings, but because they were not open to be leased.
What can you tell us about the history of this particular building in Regina?
Well, this building was originally started its life as the Alden Block, and then back in 1930 it changed to the Gordon Block. It was designed by Ernest Brown, and it was built at a cost of $50,000. It is considered in conjunction with the building next door, which is called the Canadian Western Place. And the upper part of the facade of this building has a lot of brick pilasters, and the main front face has a lot of rusticated stonework, a lot of stone rosettes on the front. And I believe as the fire department demolishes this building, which I think is actually happening in the last 15 minutes, they are going to be holding those architectural details aside to save them for future use. And
Go ahead.
What's important about this building, it's in a heritage conservation district, which is the only one, I believe, in Canada. And it's been on this bylaw list since 1989.
However, it has been sitting vacant for like over a decade, since 2011, on what should be some of the most prime real estate in downtown Regina. It's right on the Pat Fiacco Plaza, where the farmers market is. Why has that building been empty so long?
Well, that's a question that you need to ask the developer who did not have this building open for lease.
We just got a call from someone who wants to know if, Jackie, if you know anything about what's happening to the old Sears building in Regina.
No, I don't, actually.
Lenore, I understand you've also had some experience with this building that caught on fire in Regina. What can you tell us about the state it was in?
Thanks for asking that. Yeah, I had the pleasure of being part of a team that actually did an analysis of this building on behalf of the city of Regina. And we were asked to come in and do a heritage review and assessment on it. And so ourselves and J.M. Gartley and RJC structural engineers did a review of the building. And, you know, there are character-defining elements of it. It's a 3-story kind of commercial building. It's a relatively small-scale streetscape, prominent block. It's a steel frame structure with brown brick. I'm kind of reading some of this from our report. It's got some limestone on it, and as Jackie shared, some ornamental galvanized kind of embouchure, cornice marble, pattern windows, big display in that. What we found was that it was structurally sound, overall, because it has a steel I-beam construction and brick. And so, what is the most important thing with buildings like this is maintaining them, to Jackie's point. And it really speaks to the point, and the recommendations that we had was speaking to the fact that this had heritage significance. As Jackie said, it's part of a heritage conservation district, one of the only ones that we've got kind of across our country, and for good reason, because it tells a story as part of that whole plaza area in Regina. So if anybody's ever been downtown of Regina, it's that whole central plaza area with a beautiful thing where the Folk Fest and all that has taken place in the past, and it's on the corner kind of next to the big towers that are out there too. But next door to it is also heritage buildings, and so that block makes for a really interesting thing. So we found that it was still structurally strong. Yeah, there were things that needed to be done about it, like the roof. It needed to have some repairs on it. Let's get the kind of the systems and getting going them, turn the power on, all that sort of stuff. So you've got that kind of mechanization that's going through it, because you can keep the bones of it were good. Now it comes to what can you do with it in terms of an adaptive reuse. Our understanding was, and you could see from some of the articles that have been out there in the press, was that I think there was some goodwill in terms of wanting to kind of retain it, but obviously something happened. And so now it's that sad part of where, it's being stated by the fire department is too far gone. I have no way of knowing that. We're not on site. We don't have a structural engineer, but there was a fire there. But most importantly, I think what we're reading is there somebody in there? And so now they're to the point of having to do this. To Jackie's point again, a lot of stuff is not about the fact that it's a heritage building. It's a fact that any building, if you leave it without any kind of nurture or care, gets pretty quick into disrepair. I just know that from my own house, and it doesn't matter what year your house is built in, and so, it's the whole notion around that the reason why we designate buildings, and this one was a designated building, and it's part of a larger designation effort, thanks to the city of Regina for doing that, for seeing the merit of a number of them, is the whole notion that these things have a story to tell. They have good structural bones to them, and they can be retained for adaptive reuse. And so when people go to purchase a building like that with a designation on it, this is not to say, and there's a stereotype out there, that buildings like this have such strict criteria that you can't do things with them. That's not the case. I sit on the Municipal Heritage Advisory Committee in Saskatoon. We deal with heritage designations all the time on residential properties, commercial properties, and otherwise. Some people have even asked to have designations recently in this city that have gone through a whole adaptive reuse policy, but because that building's so important of what it tells and what its structure is and the character of it, that they want it designated. And there's some benefits to doing that, because the benefits of doing that is that you can actually get some good tax incentives for it. There's fundings available through municipal programs in terms of keeping up with the maintenance and repair with it and further adaptions and that. So when you have a heritage building, this is not to say that it has to be preserved to the nth degree. It is something that we're saying there are elements of it that are important to keep. Let's make sure we nurture and maintain them.
Let's hear from Jeannie. She's calling from Calgary. Hi, Jeannie.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. What are your thoughts today?
Well, I'm calling because I just wanted to. I was the one who worked with Lenore on the Gordon Block review and assessment, so I just wanted to follow up with what she very nicely shared, and just wanted to just bring forward, the thoughts that, I'm a heritage conservation consultant, so working with heritage buildings here in Alberta, and obviously have done a couple in Saskatchewan there. Just the whole concept of stewardship of our heritage buildings, in so many cases, what we are dealing with, and the lady who had with the I can't remember where she was from there in Regina, made the comment too about, I think there's just such a big lack of value of heritage buildings. by developers and by owners. And in the end, it's about stewardship of our heritage buildings, and I think it's just an area that we're really lacking in, right? And so something like the Gordon Block, which did sit vacant for over 10 years, vacant with no utilities and things like that, and not stewarding towards trying to have that building activated and being used or adaptive use, because there are lots of across our country right now. I mean, there are people being good stewards of the heritage buildings and making sure that they're finding adaptive reuse is for them, and certainly maintaining them, and trying to make sure they're being used, because if they sit vacant, it's basically demolition by neglect, right? For whatever reason. So things like threat of fire or vandalism, or just sheerly, the materials not being, maintained and taken care of. So I was really very disheartened to hear about the Gordon Block, because it's a building that had really strong integrity. There's nothing wrong with the building, and fully able to be adaptive reuse. I worked on a project. You had said at the beginning about sharing some other projects. One of the other projects I worked on early when I started consulting was the fire to the McDougall Church, which is in Morley, outside of Calgary here. And it was a 145-year-old church that ended up to fire. And what my role was is working on a study to determine what the options were, despite it being, severely damaged by fire, and it had to be taken down, the logs, and cleaned and everything like that. But made a case to the ministry so that we could, reconstruct it. And obviously, in the end, it's an interpretation to a certain degree, but we were able to save 80% of the logs, and so there's just ways to be able to save these buildings.
Ginny, I'm just curious, because you've done work in both Saskatchewan and Alberta. How does Saskatchewan compare to Alberta when it comes to reusing or protecting these heritage buildings?
I think across the country we are dealing with it in different levels, in different places. But I think Saskatchewan and Alberta, definitely the same kind of thing. Even though in Alberta we have the same scenarios, the developers, the demolition by neglect, fires. We have flooding. We've had flooding to heritage buildings. And I know that those same scenarios are taking place in Saskatchewan. I think that in working on the Gordon Block, I think that we had made a recommendation also to the city regarding some of the policies being in place. When we started working on that one, it was interesting because that historic area there, the very fact that there is an ability to do a demolition alteration permit in there, that's a negative, right? And I hadn't really seen that before. So here in Alberta anyways, on working with things, that there's actually a demolition permit potential, right? And that's actually reviewed. So I think there might be a little bit of policy stuff that Saskatchewan might be behind in, policy or kind of regulations for protecting some of its heritage. But I think it's a similar challenge in both provinces.
Jeannie, before I let you go, Jeannie, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
To your knowledge, is there some place we could look to as an example? Is there some place, a jurisdiction in Canada that maybe has incentives in place that we don't have here?
I think there's lots. Yeah, I think there's best practices that could be done. So there's quite a few, and I do a lot of best practices with any particular project, because every heritage project, whether it's policy, heritage planning, or conservation, you look to best practices to see what people are doing across the country. So there's lots of examples depending on what it is that you're looking for. And I think that having, consultants, they're certainly able to pull together what's best for a particular city or building or something like that. And I just wanted to make one last comment, and it was just really I was interested to read this morning that demolition was taking place right away on it, that somehow there was concern that there was still embers in there and it not being safe. So it will be interesting to see what happens there with the building.
All right. Jeannie, thanks so much for taking part in the conversation today. Thanks for the call.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Have a good day.
Jackie, I'll start with you. What sort of incentives are available in the city of Regina specifically, and maybe you could speak to the provincial system as well. Are there any incentives in place to encourage owners to maintain and perhaps redevelop these heritage properties? Jackie?
Absolutely. So within the city of Regina, you have like tax incentives, you have major and minor grants. There are also like funding provincially that people with heritage buildings can apply for. So when you buy a heritage building, you're buying a building that has a maintenance contract that you can go apply for when you buy it. And what kind of building can you buy where you have grants available and tax incentives?
What's the situation in Saskatchewan?
It's really similar, but one of the things that we've got underway right now is a heritage review. And the city of Saskatoon, with kind of the nudging of the Municipal Heritage Advisory Committee and our Heritage Society, has really been saying we need to update those policies that we have. So we've got some tax and incentive programs. If you go online, and I'm just looking at the online, right, up to a maximum of $150,000 for taxable properties and $75,000 for tax-exempt properties. Maintenance grants are up to 50% of the eligible projects. That might sound all well and dandy, but a lot of these budgets are already spent up. And so it's also around a couple of things. One is making people aware of that there are programs like this to begin with. Two, that once you designate, like, whoa, all of a sudden there's some good, there's some carrots here. There's not just sticks here. But it's also that we need to go further. We don't have a lot of properties designated that need to be designated. Here's one that might drop a few jaws. The Delta Besborough in Saskatoon is not a designated heritage building. It is not. Everybody
you would think of all the buildings in Saskatoon.
That and we're working on it. That's one of the things that we're working on is getting buildings like that designated. You know, we've got some of the historic churches in town that are designated, but I mean, we have to look to our own, municipalities and what they've done in terms of their own buildings in the province in terms of those. And it's a hint, nudge, nudge is be good stewards of your own properties, as the holders of the public good, and then really looking at what are the further carrots and sticks that we can put out there in terms of with heritage properties that are owned in the private sector and the community-based sector.
Okay, we're going to take a news break here in just a few moments, but I'll bring Peggy into the conversation. She's on the line in Saskatoon. Hi, Peggy.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead, Peggy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm just really sad to hear about the Gordon building. That was very unfortunate. My sympathies go out to Regina. I would just like to talk about how valuable our heritage buildings are to a city, telling the story of a city. These are it's an introduction to the history of a city and what the city is all about. So visitors really like to look at heritage buildings. I would like to draw your attention to the superintendent's residence at the forestry farm and how much the renovation, the restoration of that building has increased the value of that site considerably. We have heritage walking tours. We have a historical display inside the residence. And this is an added bonus to those visiting the forestry farm. On the other side, I would like to mention the stone barn, the beautiful stone barn at the university, which we're really concerned about. There's interest in the reuse of that building, but in the meantime, until a reuse is found, that building will deteriorate unless something is done to maintain it. So we're waiting for a report from a workshop that was done with regard to reuse of the stone barn. But that could be a gateway to the university, talking about the history, the agricultural history of the university, just a terrific entrance to the university. So it's all about, willingness, maintenance, particularly in that building, but to look at the value that those buildings can bring to a particular site. I think that's about all, really, that
All right.
I have to say.
Thanks very much for calling, Peggy.
Although I would like to mention the fact, the place that retaining heritage buildings play in the climate change crisis that we're in now. We have to remember that demolishing buildings cost money. Considerable money. Developers will buy land with a building on it, demolish it. And what is happening to all that material going probably to the landfill?
Okay.
So we have a duty, I think, to talk about the place that heritage buildings play in climate control.
Yeah. Peggy, thanks again.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you very much
Bye-bye.
for the call. Okay, we're going to take a quick break for a news update and then back to today's conversation. If you have joined us recently, we're talking about, the big topic is heritage buildings in Saskatchewan. Of course, Regina has lost another heritage building, the Gordon Block, to a fire. But we know that these buildings are disappearing left, right, and center, and we'd love to hear from you today, folks. Do you think there's is there value to maintaining these heritage buildings, or do you just see them as old and beyond their time? Maybe there's a heritage building in your community that has been saved, has been maybe repurposed, or perhaps there's a heritage building in your community that you're concerned about. Okay, folks, back to today's conversation. We're talking about heritage buildings in Saskatchewan. As we just heard from David, and as we've mentioned throughout the hour today, another heritage building in Regina lost to a fire. And we'd like to hear from you today, folks. How far should we go to try to preserve heritage buildings in Saskatchewan? Is it a priority for you? Perhaps your community has successfully repurposed an older building and given it a new lease on life. Now, Jackie, before we go back to callers, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about what the city of Regina has done to protect these kind of properties, if anything. You mentioned that this is in this area of downtown Regina has a particular designation. Can you tell us more about that?
So this is it's called the Victoria Park Heritage Conservation District. It has to do with all the buildings that surround Victoria Park and all the facades of the buildings that go down the Scar Street. That is just designation of the front of the building. Most designation does not have to do with the interior of the building. So the city has just gone through a major revamp of their heritage policy, and that was in 2 phases. The last phase was a maintenance policy, and the Gordon Block was part of that conversation. So there was a demolition request on the Gordon Block submitted in May of 2022. Harvard was provided with that report that Eleanor talked about earlier. And the city informed them that they would not be recommending demolition of the Gordon Block. And I do believe they had started conversations with a conservation plan as to how they were going to bring this building back up. And that was as current as last week, but then we have the fire. So this is a very unusual situation where we have a conservation district. It applies to all the buildings within a sector of the downtown. It creates a vibrant downtown. And when you have businesses in those buildings, then you continue to have that vibrancy in your downtown. And when we talk about, as Peggy did, about environmental benefits of preserving heritage buildings, reducing the volume of materials that end up in the landfills, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. For example, if a new building went up on this site that was an energy efficient one, it would take 35 to 50 years of efficient operation to compensate for the CO2 that was emitted during the construction of that building. And the Gordon block has something called embodied energy, which is energy that was used in the construction of that building. And when there's a fire or a demolition, that embodied energy is lost. So there's many components to losing not just our heritage of the city, but the environmental aspects and the financial and vibrancy of your city.
Lenore, do we have anything similar in Saskatoon?
No, but we've talked about it. We've talked about kind of looking at heritage conservation districts, actually right on the Spadina Crescent, and as a heritage landscape with the historic, churches that we have there and different buildings. We've got some difference going on there. We've got a new high rise that's going to be coming between Knox United Church and the Anglican Church, St. John's Anglican Church, where we just had the Big Moon project done by the local symphony and that. And so there was a lot of dialogue about that kind of infill opportunity and how to do it in a respectful and thoughtful way that still protects those heritage churches that are there while also respecting, the fact of looking at development. I think the critical thing here is that we don't want to be looking at development as either or. That's always been my beef. And I think, Garth, you and I go back a long time on this. I've been part of the heritage scene for way too many decades, and becoming heritage myself now as all the puns in. But I mean, the whole notion of it is it's not either or. Heritage buildings are part of our development schematic and an important part of it. And, it is development companies like Nicor and Regina, and Ken Ox and his crew here in Saskatoon. And there are others throughout the whole province that have done really good jobs in terms of protecting some of these older buildings and adaptively reusing them, like the Hotel Senator and the old station place, old railway station here in Saskatoon. We can go to the Dirks building and all that sort of stuff in terms of just seeing what some of the really, really good, Brinks building, that was another one. But, there's some really good examples of mixed-use redevelopment that's done, adaptive reuse. And so in Saskatoon, what we've kind of done is we've taken the approach of, having the opportunity to designate a building, having the opportunity to put a building on hold. Registering your building is kind of that first kind of step into considering heritage designation. But I want to go back to something else, because we forget things like Wanuskewin right now is a site. It's a heritage site. It was a national heritage site. Now we're going for UNESCO designation. I've been part of the Canadian Commission for UNESCO for a few decades and sat on the executive there and was really pumped and fired up about seeing Wanuskewin on that. And this transcends not just the built environment. We're talking about a tangible and intangible history, that telling the story of places. When people are coming to be attracted to a place like Saskatoon to live and work, to go to university, what do they look at? They look at what are the bones of the place? What's the stories it's tell? What does it feel like? What's the vibe of it? And heritage plays a critical part. We know that from studies that are done, putting my planner hat on and various other hats. Like, these are the things that attract people to place, is those things that make place, that keep place. And so it's around looking at those kinds of considerations. And so heritage has a part to play in it. So.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the phone side now. Renee is in Regina. Hi, Renee.
Howdy.
Yeah, go ahead, Renee.
Well, first of all, I want to thank your guests for coming on and for taking part in the discussion. Heritage is very important. I am the chair of the Cathedral Area Community Association, and I was chair of the Connaught School Parent Council when they were when they replaced the school. It was at the time a devastating thing that they would even consider tearing down Connaught. When I drive by the new building, what I see is a giant Lego building that doesn't fit the community. At the time, the school board and the government did a study what the community wanted, and as far as I remember, it was overwhelming support for keeping the school. I think, though, that there has to be an appetite for keeping old buildings that we just don't have in Regina. Moose Jaw is wonderful for their old buildings. When they were talking about doing work to Connaught, we went to see some of the old schools that they've redone in Moose Jaw, and they're absolutely gorgeous. They have they're wheelchair accessible. One has an elevator on the side. They were Wi-Fi accessible. Absolutely beautiful. At the time, though, they said that it would cost, I think, $18 million to demolish the building and replace the building. And it seems to me that it was about the same price to replace the building with the new building that's on there. Like I said, I mean, it's history now, and the building is there, and it is a beautiful building that is there now. My question is, what is the life expectancy of this building? Can it be compared to the 100-year-old Connaught building? When you walked in Connaught, the marble floors and oak and that kind of craftsmanship can't be bought nowadays. And I think that there just is no appetite. If you want to do something, you can do it. If your community wants you to keep a building, as far as I'm concerned, the government should do what they can to stand behind their community. But there was no appetite at the time. And my son, who attended the school, called Connaught Regina's Hogwarts. And that was the feeling you got when you walked in the school. In the old school, I think at the time they were talking about $1.8 million to do the immediate repairs. And they were talking about the problem with the school is there was no rebar in the cement and deflection in the walls and all that kind of stuff. At the time, we had a parent that was on the council, community council, that was involved in the reconstruction work at the ledge. She was an engineer and she oversaw the project. So we had firsthand experience, someone looking at Connaught, talking about the viability of the school. She was prepared to bring in underground penetrating radar to see what was under the building. They were talking about bringing in laser equipment to see if there was any deflection in the walls. The school board wouldn't let us get anywhere close to that. They wouldn't let us bring in any equipment to see the viability of keeping the school. They were just determined to replace the school, period.
Okay.
And we were, they did a community thing about, what do parents want in the school? What do they like about Connaught? Well, it doesn't matter where you go, across Canada, they're going to say the same thing. Green space, windows, plenty of school, plenty of light, wheelchair accessibility, all that kind of stuff. It was completely possible to do that with the old school.
Yeah. Okay, Renee, we've gone on for quite a while now, Renee. I'm going to have to stop it here. Okay, Renee, thanks so much. Thanks for this story. I'm going to move on quickly to Karen in Saskatoon. Hi, Karen.
Hi. I'm very happy to segue on what that gentleman just talked about, but I'm talking about two schools in Saskatoon that I'm concerned about. King George School, 111-year-old, big castle, beautiful, solid. Again, we just can't build them like that now. And it's been supported by generations of families, paid for. There was a new roof put on it not that long ago. And now that school's closing. And Pleasant Hill School, I heard a rumor that maybe they're not going to tear it down. I hope that's right. Anyway, these are important places. They were never residential schools. They have lots of space on the ground for adaptive reuse. You could build on and put elevators and a cultural center and different things going on. I just hope that whoever looks after the next manifestation of King George School, that they don't tear it down, because you can't replace something like that. Right. And it's the cornerstone of our neighborhood and holds a lot of important history. It was one of the first community schools. It's got tremendous Aboriginal programming that they've been doing for a long time there. It's a good school, and and it could be turned into apartments. It could be turned into an art center, all different possibilities. It's a beautiful old thing. And,
okay, Karen. Thanks, Karen.
The final thing I want to say is thank you to the Heritage people for their commitment to what they do.
Okay, thanks again. Thanks for the call. Lenore, just on following up on Karen's call, we do have a few of those old castle schools, as they're called, beautiful old buildings. I think they were meant to intimidate, but what is the future of those two schools, to your knowledge?
Well, I think there may be some truth to the rumor with Pleasant Hill School. There is a nice pleasant rumor going on about Pleasant Hill School, that as an urgent care center, that there is a thought that they may be keeping a part of it or all of it. So that's a good news story. And I know that King George is under analysis right now, and there's some thought that there might be some considerations around the adaptive reuse. I know that we'll be asking for a follow-up, I think, through the Municipal Heritage Advisory Committees. I don't have an answer on that one, but we're watching them, both as a Heritage Society and the Municipal Heritage Advisory Committee, and to the point around adaptive reuse and seeing what other uses can be beneficial to our community, because we know one of the key ones that was mentioned is housing.
Jackie, what are owners' responsibilities under current bylaws in Regina to maintain heritage buildings?
They need to look after their heritage buildings, and that means safety for the public, interior and exterior. The only problem with that is that sometimes the city does not have access to the interior of these buildings, and what happens is the exterior is kept up, but you have no idea what it looks like on the interior. And unless owners of these buildings let you in, you don't really know. And so if the roof is falling through and water is penetrating the envelope of the building, then the floors fall through, and then you have catastrophic failure. And that was the case of the Burns-Hanley building. But one thing I do want to say is we do have a good example of adaptive reuse in Regina is the College Avenue campus restoration. That building was a huge project. Specialists were brought in to consult with the University of Regina, and I know that some people are still unhappy with the deal that they brokered to get that done. But I think if they were going to start that process today, the College Avenue campus wouldn't be able to be pulled off. And you've got a gorgeous castle-like building again that is state-of-the-art on the interior, and it's hard to tell. I can't tell, and I've been in that building many times, which are the old parts and which are the new, because all the new has been sympathetically restored.
What's the state the state of that in Saskatoon, Lenore? What are owners' responsibilities under current bylaws to maintain a heritage building?
It's the same thing, is that they're supposed to be maintaining them, looking after them, and making sure that it's safe for the public and for those that are utilizing those buildings. So, it's to Jeannie's point earlier around kind of, demolition by neglect and just not having the resources necessarily in place to keep an eye on all of this sort of stuff. So that's the review of what we got going on with heritage, policies and such.
To both of you, so both cities have a policy and a bylaw. Mm-hmm. What about enforcement?
There you go.
So in Regina,
go ahead, Jackie.
The maintenance policy has just been in effect in the last year. So the city is working, in this case, like with the Gordon block, with the owners to try to get the owner to repair the property. And while offering incentives and major and minor grants like we talked about before, but if the city feels that these repairs are not being taken, then the city can take that on to council, and council can order a repair order. And then if it's not done, then the city can come in and do those repairs, and then a lien is put on the property until the property owner pays.
Okay, now a term that we hear from time to time is demolition or redevelopment by neglect. And I wonder, Jackie, could you remind us what happened to the Travelers Building in Regina?
So they left the windows open. Every pigeon in the vicinity of the downtown roosted in that building. It had a horsehair dance floor up on the second floor, I believe, and it was a toxic place where you couldn't get in. I know that there were many people within the city of Regina that tried to put forth plans to adaptive reuse this building, but the developer was not interested in it, and the city did ask them to close the windows, which they did, but then all of a sudden the windows were back open again, and then a mysterious fire happens.
Yeah. Lenore, let's talk about a Saskatoon example would be the Farnham block, that are known to most, I guess, as Lydia's.
Yeah.
What happened there?
Well, it's been really involved in that one. It was a case where there was a lot of discussion by the owners at the time as saying, it's gotten past the point where we can do what we can do in an affordable enough manner, and we got to see this go. And so the unfortunate thing of it is it didn't have a designation on it. And so it was a heritage building. It was on a holding bylaw, so it wasn't fully designated, if I'm recalling correctly. This is a few years back, but there wasn't enough teeth in the policies to actually fight that case in that way. And so the thought was that it was better to come down and do a redevelopment that keep it. Again, it depends on the expertise you have of people that are looking at these buildings. Different structural engineers have different expertise, and those that have the expertise in heritage look at that building in a different way in terms of how it can be brought up to standards, to national building codes, and all those kinds of things you can do, which you can do. You can do that with old buildings just as much as with building new construction. So that was a sad case of the owners not feeling that there was enough that they could put in terms of investment to keep that building going. There were other people that were interested in the redevelopment potential of the Lydia's building, but it was too far gone in terms of down the path with the owners at the time who said, no, we're not going to go down that path now. So it was an unfortunate one.
Jackie, is there any benefit to the owner of a building to get heritage designation?
Absolutely. Like they can do tax incentives. They can apply for major and minor grants. They're owning a piece of history of the city, and I think that can't be overlooked. That people in the city appreciate this, and I think it's important that the people who oppose destruction of historic places in the city have their voice and don't feel like they're not heard. And I've heard several people who have thanked us for coming on here. And I wish that more people in the city of Regina would have called into this program. It sounds like Saskatoon is really on the phone.
Before we run out of time, I want to ask each of you, I'd like to end on a positive note here. Do you have any examples of where buildings have been successfully retrofitted or repurposed? Lenore?
Well, yeah, the one that I was trying to remember earlier, so thanks for letting me do a little course correction. The Drinkle building, Drinkle number 3, building that's downtown on 3rd Avenue. It's a mixed-use development. It's Dave Denny that's the owner of that, and he's just done a fantastic job. He's got residents there for small units for folks living, singles and otherwise that are living in there. He's got commercial space. He's got restaurant space in there, a rooftop event kind of center there, a community room that the community can use, and it's a known entity in Saskatoon. So it's got murals on the side of it telling the history of our mayors in Saskatoon. So there's a lot going on in that building. So that's a great, I think, success story. Another one is the old EGADS building that's now an event center on kind of 2nd Avenue and that. And it has gone through a transformation, and it had a whole bunch of cladding that was on it, and then they removed it and saw, oh my goodness, there's this beautiful brick building underneath it. And so they've brought it back to that era, which is fantastic.
And Jackie, can you give us a couple of examples from Regina? You mentioned the College Avenue buildings. What are some others?
So we have the Frontenac, which is an apartment complex, is like stepping back in time. You have the Somerset, another apartment or commercial mixed-use building. You have the Mayfair, an apartment complex. And actually right now, the Frontenac, one of the people who lived in the Frontenac has written a play that's called Oak Floors, and it's all about the story of the Frontenac. So those are great examples, all done by one developer, Nicor, in the city, who is a developer who appreciates heritage and knows how to use the system to maintain these buildings successfully.
Okay, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but I'd like to get each of your thoughts on what needs to change. What more needs to be done to protect historic and heritage buildings in our cities? Lenore?
I'll just say that, you have to have good municipal leadership that sees this as something that's of value and importance, and really looking to step up the policies and the incentives and programs. And I'm happy to say is that City of Saskatoon is starting to do that review right now. They're in the midst of it, and hopefully there'll be some good outcomes that come from that.
What do you think could change in Regina, Jackie, to make to make it more reasonable to maintain rather than demolish these buildings?
I think that we need to protect more of landscapes. I think somebody mentioned a landscape before. There's the Crescents, which is a landscape neighborhood that needs to be a streetscape that needs to be protected. We need to make it easier. We talked about carrots. We need to inform people within the city the benefits of having a heritage property. I think people are jaded and think that, the developers are going to get their way and that it doesn't really matter what they say. They're not going to be listened to. And I think the leadership within the city, we need to have that expertise as far as heritage conservation consultants, heritage engineers. We need those people on site at the City of Regina.
Right. And finally, for both of you, if you could take over for just one day, what would be your priority building right now in Regina, Jackie?
Oh my gosh, I think Lenore needs to go first.
Okay, you think about it, Lenore.
I'll just say the Besborough Hotel is something that we want to see has heritage designation on it.
I've lived here most of my life,
Yeah.
and I was so surprised to hear that of all the buildings in Saskatoon, that one's not heritage. How about you, Jackie? Have you thought about it for a minute?
I think that when people ask me what my favorite building is in the City of Regina, I have to say it's the Heritage Lecture Hall in the College Avenue campus, which has been restored. So that's the thing that I'm most proud of that we've done, because we partnered with the University of Regina to make sure those building materials that weren't used were recycled into the community.
Right. Jackie and Lenore, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.